The bustling streets of London were alive with excitement as tourists flocked to Buckingham Palace, eager to catch a glimpse of the iconic royal guards. Among them was Diane, a bold and unapologetically loud American tourist. Dressed in a bright jacket and a wide-brimmed hat, she stood out not only for her attire, but also for her booming voice and audacious attitude. "This is what everyone's fussing over," Diane said, eyeing the guards stationed in front of the palace. Her tone dripped with mockery as she adjusted her sunglasses and scoffed. "They're just standing there, doing nothing. I could have stayed in New York if I wanted to watch people ignore me." Her companion, Linda, tugged on Diane's arm. "Keep it down, Diane. People are staring. These guards are part of the tradition here. Show some respect." "Respect?" Diane repeated, her laughter echoing in the square. "Please, Linda, they're just guys in funny hats pretending to be statues. Watch this." The focus of Diane's attention was Marcus, a royal guard who had been serving for nearly a decade. His tall, imposing figure stood perfectly still in the vibrant red uniform and the iconic bearskin hat. Beneath the hat, his calm, unshaken expression masked years of rigorous training and a deep sense of duty. Tourists gathered, snapping pictures and recording videos. Marcus remained as immovable as a statue, his gaze fixed straight ahead. But Diane was determined to provoke a reaction. "Let's see how serious he really is," she said, striding up to him. Her voice grew louder with each step, drawing the attention of nearby onlookers. Standing just inches away from Marcus, Diane waved her hand in front of his face. "Hey, can you even hear me in there? Blink if you're alive." The crowd murmured, a mix of curiosity and discomfort rippling through them. Smartphones were raised, capturing the unfolding scene. Linda pulled at Diane's sleeve again. "Stop it! You're embarrassing us!" But Diane shrugged her off. "Relax, Linda. It's not like he's going to do anything. Look at him. He's basically a mannequin." Still, Marcus didn't flinch. His eyes remained locked on a point in the distance, his stance as rigid as ever. "Oh, come on!" Diane exclaimed, her frustration mounting. "You're seriously not going to move?" She began pulling faces, sticking out her tongue and exaggerating her expressions as the crowd watched, some shaking their heads in disapproval. But Diane wasn't done. Emboldened by Marcus's lack of response, she reached out and tugged at the edge of his bearskin hat. Gasps rippled through the audience. "Leave him alone," someone called from the crowd, but Diane ignored them. Smirking, she turned to Linda and said, "See? Nothing. He's not even human." Then Diane crossed the line. With a sudden motion, she raised her hand and slapped Marcus on the cheek. The sound of the slap echoed in the stunned silence that followed. The crowd froze, some recording the moment, others too shocked to react. Marcus stood motionless, his face impassive despite the insult. But something in his eyes shifted, a flicker of resolve, a quiet anger beneath his stoic exterior. Diane took a step back, her smirk faltering. She hadn't expected this. Diane's face turned crimson, her earlier arrogance now replaced by visible discomfort. She glanced around at the crowd, which had shifted its attention entirely to her. Phones were raised, capturing her every reaction, every failed attempt to explain her behavior. For someone who thrived on being the center of attention, this was a nightmare she couldn't control. "I didn't mean it like that," Diane muttered, her voice barely audible over the murmurs of the crowd. Marcus stood tall, his posture exuding authority and quiet strength. The sting of her slap was long forgotten. What lingered was the significance of the moment. For years he had silently endured taunts, insults, and ignorance. But this time felt different. This wasn't just about him, it was about what he represented. "You didn't mean it?" Marcus repeated, his voice calm but piercing. "Tell me then, what did you mean when you mocked a tradition older than you, older than this very palace? What did you mean when you disrespected a role that countless men and women have taken pride in, some even giving their lives for?" The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers a stark contrast to Diane's shrinking demeanor. Some shouted words of encouragement. "Well said! Show her!" Others simply watched in awe, their respect for Marcus growing with each passing second. Among the spectators was a young woman holding a small child. She stepped forward, her voice clear and steady. You've humiliated yourself, not him. Maybe it's time you learned what respect truly means. Diane turned to the woman, her frustration bubbling to the surface. Who are you to lecture me? I didn't hurt anyone. You didn't hurt anyone? The woman shot back. You slapped a man who was doing his job, representing his country. Do you think that's nothing? The crowd murmured in agreement, their disapproval of Diane becoming louder. At that moment, an older man stepped forward. His weathered face and kind eyes hinted at a life full of experience. He spoke with a soft but firm tone, addressing Diane directly. When I was your age, he began, I made the same mistake. I thought respect was something you earned, not something you gave freely. But life taught me otherwise. Respect is the foundation of everything. Without it, we have nothing. Diane looked down, her bravado crumbling under the weight of the man's words. Marcus, sensing the shift in her demeanor, spoke again. Respect isn't about agreeing with someone. It's about recognizing their humanity, their dignity. Today you failed to do that, but it's not too late to learn. The young boy from earlier stepped forward again, his small voice cutting through the tension. Maybe you should say sorry, he said, looking up at Diane with innocent eyes. Diane's lips quivered, and for the first time, tears welled up in her eyes. She looked at Marcus, her voice shaky. I'm sorry, she said, her words barely a whisper. I didn't mean to hurt you or disrespect you. I didn't think. Marcus nodded, his expression softening. Apologies are the first step, but actions speak louder than words. The crowd, moved by the exchange, began to clap again. Some shouted words of support for Marcus, while others cheered Diane's attempt at redemption. But as Diane turned to leave, a voice from the back of the crowd called out, Wait! A man in a dark suit stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. The crowd parted to let him through, and whispers began to ripple through the audience. Who is that? Someone asked. It's the palace steward, another replied. He's with the royal staff. The man approached Marcus, his expression unreadable. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he extended a hand. On behalf of Buckingham Palace and the Royal Guard, he said, thank you for upholding the dignity of your role today. Your composure and dedication are an example to us all. Marcus shook the steward's hand, his professionalism unwavering. Thank you, sir, he replied. The steward turned to Diane, his gaze sharp. As for you, ma'am, consider this a lesson in humility. Not everyone would have handled your actions as gracefully as this man has. Diane nodded, her face a mixture of shame and gratitude. I understand, she said quietly. The steward stepped back, and the crowd began to disperse, the tension of the moment slowly fading. But the lesson lingered in the air, a reminder to all who witnessed it. Respect is not just given, it is earned through every action, every word, every choice. As Marcus resumed his post, standing tall and proud, he glanced at the boy who had shown such courage earlier. He gave the child a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of thanks that would stay with the boy for years to come. And for Diane, the memory of that day would become a turning point, a moment when she was forced to confront her own flaws and grow into a better person. Days after the incident at Buckingham Palace, a video of the confrontation had gone viral on social media. Clips of Diane's actions, Marcus's unshakable composure, and his powerful words had captivated millions. The internet was buzzing with opinions, debates, and reflections. Respect isn't earned, it's given first, one commenter wrote under the video, sparking thousands of replies and shares. Another said, this guard showed more grace under pressure than most of us ever could. A true example of dignity. While some criticized Diane harshly, others took a more forgiving tone. She made a mistake, one user wrote. Let's hope she learns from it and becomes better. Diane, meanwhile, was struggling to navigate the aftermath. Her face was now known worldwide, and while she avoided reading the comments directly, the weight of her actions loomed large. She spent hours reflecting on that day, replaying Marcus's words in her mind. You didn't think about respect, about boundaries, about consequences. They weren't just words anymore. They had become a mantra, echoing in her head every time she encountered someone in a position of service, a cashier, a waiter, even the janitor at her office. For the first time, she began to notice the humanity in others, the quiet dignity in the work they did. Across the city, Marcus's life had also changed. He had never sought attention. His duty as a royal guard was to remain invisible in a way, blending into the pageantry of the palace. But now people recognized him. "Hey, you're the guard from that video," a woman exclaimed as she passed him on the street one evening. Marcus nodded politely, acknowledging her with a small smile before continuing on his way. He wasn't comfortable with the newfound fame, but he hoped the video's message would resonate with people far beyond the viral moment. One morning, as he prepared for another day of duty, Marcus received an unexpected letter delivered to the barracks. It was addressed simply to the royal guard in the viral video. Curious, he opened it and began to read. "Dear Marcus, you don't know me, but I know you. Like millions of others, I watched the video of your interaction with the tourist. I was deeply moved by your restraint, your words, and your dedication to your role. I've spent my life taking people for granted, assuming their worth based on what they could do for me. But you reminded me of something profound. Every person deserves respect, not for what they do, but for who they are. I hope one day I can show the same grace and strength you did that day. With gratitude, a changed heart." Marcus set the letter down, feeling a swell of emotion. It wasn't the first message of its kind he'd received, but each one reminded him why his work mattered, not just as a guard, but as a representative of values that transcended uniforms and traditions. Meanwhile, Diane was on a personal mission. Determined to make amends, she began researching the Royal Guard and their history. She learned about the rigorous training they endured, the sacrifices they made, and the deep traditions they upheld. One rainy afternoon, she found herself back at Buckingham Palace, not to provoke, but to apologize properly. She waited patiently by the gates, holding a neatly wrapped package in her hands. When Marcus's shift ended, she approached him cautiously. "Excuse me, Marcus," she began, her voice steady but nervous. He turned, his face as unreadable as ever. "Yes? I know you probably don't want to see me again," Diane said, her cheeks flushing. "But I couldn't leave things the way they were. I was rude, disrespectful, and completely out of line. You didn't deserve that." Marcus studied her for a moment before replying. "Apologies are words. What matters is whether they're followed by actions." "I understand," Diane said, nodding. "That's why I brought this." She handed him the package, which he unwrapped carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter and a small token, a polished metal engraved with the words, "For dignity and service." "I know it's not much," Diane said quickly, "but I wanted you to have something to remind you of how much your actions meant. Not just to me, but to everyone who saw that video." Marcus looked at the metal, his stoic exterior softening. "Thank you," he said simply, tucking the metal into his pocket. As Diane turned to leave, Marcus called after her. "Diane!" She stopped, turning back to face him. "Respect isn't about never making a mistake," he said. "It's about learning from them and doing better. It seems you've started to understand that." Diane smiled, tears brimming in her eyes. "Thank you, Marcus. I'll keep trying." The video continued to circulate online, inspiring movements and discussions about respect, service, and humanity. Schools used it as a teaching tool, workplaces included it in training sessions, and for many it became a reminder to treat everyone with dignity, no matter their role or station. Marcus, ever humble, returned to his duties, standing guard with the same unwavering dedication. But now, every day brought a new sense of purpose, knowing that his actions had sparked change, not just in Diane, but in countless others. Diane, on the other hand, embarked on a journey of personal growth, using her platform to advocate for respect and kindness. She became a vocal supporter of service workers, using her story as an example of how much one moment of thoughtlessness could impact someone's life, and how one moment of grace could change everything. Months passed, but the impact of that fateful day at Buckingham Palace lingered like an echo across continents. Diane had become a changed woman. The viral incident wasn't just a moment of humiliation for her. It was a wake-up call, one she chose to embrace instead of burying in shame. Determined to rebuild her reputation and give meaning to her mistake, Diane began volunteering at shelters and organizations that provided support to service workers and underprivileged communities. She shared her story openly, admitting her faults in interviews and speeches. The vulnerability she displayed resonated with many. "I used to be someone who looked down on others without realizing it," she confessed during a televised talk show. That slap wasn't just a disrespect to Marcus. It was a reflection of my ignorance, my lack of empathy. But that day, Marcus taught me something I'll carry forever. Everyone deserves dignity, no exceptions. Her sincerity began to win people over. Where once she was ridiculed, she was now met with words of encouragement and admiration for her transformation. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his quiet life of duty, unaffected by the fame that still surrounded the viral video. Letters and gifts still arrived at the barracks, most addressed to him. He read each one carefully, often moved by the stories people shared about how the video had inspired them to change. One letter in particular stood out. It was from a young girl in a small town halfway across the world. "Dear Marcus, my dad works as a janitor at my school, and kids used to make fun of him. I felt embarrassed sometimes too. But then I saw your video. I saw how proud you were to do your job, no matter what anyone said. Now I'm proud of my dad too. Thank you for teaching me that every job deserves respect." Marcus folded the letter and placed it in his pocket, carrying it with him as a reminder of why standing firm in his values mattered. One day, Diane reached out to Marcus through official channels, requesting a meeting. At first, he hesitated. What more could she have to say? But something told him to agree. They arranged to meet at a small community center where Diane had been volunteering. When Marcus arrived, he found Diane helping set up tables for a fundraising event. She was dressed simply, a far cry from the flashy tourist who had once caused a scene at Buckingham Palace. "Marcus," she said, her tone warm and genuine as she extended her hand. "Diane," he replied, shaking her hand firmly. "I asked to meet because I wanted to thank you again," she began, "not just for what you did that day, but for how you changed my life. I've tried to do better, to be better, and it all started because you chose to handle the situation with grace instead of anger." Marcus nodded, his expression soft but unreadable. "We all have the capacity to grow," he said simply. "I also wanted to tell you about something I've been working on," Diane continued. "It's a project to support service workers and their families. We're creating scholarships for their children, hosting events to honor their work, and raising awareness about the respect they deserve. I wanted to dedicate this event to you, Marcus, because you're the reason it exists." Marcus blinked, taken aback. He had never sought recognition or accolades, yet here it was, a tangible example of the ripple effect his actions had caused. "That's, unexpected," he said finally. "But if it helps others, then I'm glad." Diane smiled. "It's not just helping, it's changing lives." The event was a resounding success, with hundreds of people in attendance. Marcus was invited to speak, but he kept his words brief and humble. "Respect is a choice," he said. "It's something we give freely, not something we withhold until someone earns it. If this project can remind even one person of that truth, then it's worth it." The audience erupted into applause, and Diane felt tears well up in her eyes. This wasn't just a redemption arc for her. It was a testament to how one person's strength of character could inspire transformation on a global scale. As the months turned into years, the story of Marcus and Diane became a symbol of change, shared in classrooms, workplaces, and homes. Diane's project expanded, helping thousands of families and fostering a culture of respect and kindness. And Marcus? He remained steadfast in his role, standing tall at his post, a quiet guardian of both tradition and humanity. Though he never sought fame, his legacy lived on in the lives he touched, proving that even the smallest acts of integrity could ripple outward to create a wave of change. The story of a slap became so much more, a reminder that respect once given can change the world. Elijah stood tall, his disciplined frame a testament to years of military training and self-control. The palace courtyard bustled with tourists, taking pictures and admiring the grandeur of the royal residence. Yet in the midst of this historic serenity, a single, loud voice disrupted the harmony. Mary, a tourist on her grand European vacation, had found herself irate. The incident from earlier, her blatant disrespect toward Elijah, was now making rounds on social media. Unbeknownst to her, the footage had reached millions within hours, and outrage was mounting. But Mary remained unaware, too preoccupied with her indignation and a misguided sense of self-righteousness. Elijah, however, was not the man to crumble under scrutiny. Behind the sharp uniform and impassive gaze lay a story of perseverance that few could imagine. Born in a small town, Elijah had always dreamed of serving his country. His parents, immigrants who worked tirelessly to provide him with opportunities, had instilled in him the values of dignity, hard work, and resilience. When he joined the Royal Guards, Elijah had known he would face challenges, but he hadn't anticipated the intensity of the scrutiny and prejudice that came with his position. Being one of the few black guards, he often found himself the target of stares, whispers, and the occasional outright hostility. Yet through it all, he maintained his composure, determined to honor both his role and his heritage. This day, however, felt different. As Mary ranted to anyone who would listen, a crowd began to gather around the courtyard. Some tourists were curious, others concerned, and a few were already live streaming the scene. Mary pointed at Elijah, her voice dripping with entitlement. "I paid good money to be here, and this man thinks he can ignore me," she yelled, oblivious to the growing disapproval in the crowd. A woman in her early 30s stepped forward, her phone still recording. "Excuse me," she said sharply, "but maybe you should educate yourself before embarrassing yourself further. The guards are not here to entertain you. They're here to protect the palace." Mary turned, her face flushing with anger. "And who are you to tell me what to do?" she snapped. The woman didn't back down. "I'm someone who respects people doing their jobs. Unlike you." The crowd murmured in agreement, and Mary's bravado faltered for a moment. But instead of stepping back, she turned her ire once more toward Elijah. "He slapped me," she cried, her voice trembling with feigned outrage. Elijah, still motionless, said nothing. The crowd, however, was not so easily fooled. A man in his 50s spoke up. "Lady, we all saw what happened. You slapped him, not the other way around. And let me remind you, that's assault." Mary's mouth opened and closed as she tried to form a retort. Before she could speak, a palace official arrived, flanked by two uniformed officers. The murmurs grew louder as the crowd parted to let them through. "Ma'am," the official began, his voice firm, "we've reviewed the footage and spoken to witnesses. Your behavior today is unacceptable. You will be escorted off the premises immediately." Mary's face turned ashen. But, but he... "Enough," the official interrupted. "This is a historic site, and our guards are here to ensure its safety and dignity. Disrespecting them is not only disgraceful, but also punishable under the law." As the officers gently but firmly led Mary away, the crowd erupted into applause. Elijah remained still, his expression unchanged, but a flicker of gratitude crossed his eyes. Later that evening, Elijah sat alone in the guards' quarters. The day's events replayed in his mind, not with anger, but with a quiet sense of vindication. He knew his duty was to serve and protect, not to engage in conflicts. But today had been different. Today, the world had seen him not just as a silent figure in a uniform, but as a man worthy of respect. As he prepared for another day on duty, Elijah resolved to continue standing tall, not just for himself, but for everyone who looked up to him, everyone who had ever faced prejudice, and everyone who believed in justice. The incident would not define him, but the strength he showed in its aftermath certainly would. The fallout from the incident began to unfold swiftly. Social media was ablaze with discussions, hashtags, and debates. The footage of Mary's outrageous behavior had gone viral, and people from around the world weighed in. Some expressed shock and anger, others shared stories of similar experiences, and many hailed Elijah's composure as the epitome of grace under pressure. Mary, meanwhile, had returned to her hotel in a fury. She spent hours crafting a narrative that painted her as the victim of an unjust system. But as she scrolled through the countless comments and reposts of the video, it became painfully clear that her version of events was not being believed. The world had seen the truth, and her reputation was rapidly unraveling. Back at the palace, Elijah tried to carry on with his duties as usual. The royal guards were trained to stay focused, regardless of external distractions. But this was no ordinary distraction. Each time Elijah stepped into the courtyard, he was met with waves of support from tourists and locals alike. Strangers offered him words of encouragement, Some even thanked him for his service, and others simply nodded in silent solidarity. The attention was both heartwarming and overwhelming. Elijah had never sought the spotlight. He was a man of quiet strength, someone who believed in actions over words. Yet now his story was resonating far beyond the palace gates. Meanwhile, within the palace walls, the incident had sparked a much-needed conversation. The royal family and their advisors had taken note of the public's reaction, and there was a growing consensus that something had to be done. Elijah's dignity and professionalism had highlighted the importance of diversity and inclusion within such a historic institution. The head of the Royal Guards, Commander Harris, called Elijah into his office one afternoon. The room was adorned with medals, certificates, and photographs, a testament to generations of service and leadership. "Elijah," Commander Harris began, his tone both formal and warm, "I want to commend you for the way you handled yourself during the incident. Your professionalism and restraint were exemplary." "Thank you, sir," Elijah replied, his voice steady but humble. "We've been receiving letters, emails, and messages from people all over the world," the commander continued. "They're inspired by you, by your strength and composure. And frankly, so am I." Elijah shifted slightly, unsure of how to respond. He had always seen his role as one of service, not recognition. "The royal family would like to meet you," Harris said, leaning forward. "They want to personally thank you and discuss how we can turn this moment into an opportunity for growth and change." Elijah's eyes widened in surprise. "The royal family?" "Yes," Harris confirmed. "They believe this is a chance to showcase the values we stand for, not just as an institution, but as a nation." The meeting was arranged for the following week. In the days leading up to it, Elijah felt a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight, let alone sitting down with royalty, but he also understood the significance of the moment. This wasn't just about him. It was about representation, justice, and the need for progress. When the day arrived, Elijah donned his ceremonial uniform, its crisp lines and polished buttons reflecting his pride in his role. He was escorted to a grand chamber within the palace, where members of the royal family awaited him. The conversation was heartfelt and candid. The royal family expressed their gratitude and admiration for Elijah's conduct. They also acknowledged the broader issues highlighted by the incident and shared their commitment to addressing them. "We must do better," said the queen consort, her tone sincere, "and we must ensure that every person who serves this institution feels valued and respected." Elijah left the meeting with a renewed sense of purpose. He knew there was still much work to be done, but he also knew he had a platform now, a chance to make a difference not just for himself, but for others who looked up to him. Across town, Mary was grappling with the consequences of her actions. Her attempts to control the narrative had backfired spectacularly, and she was now facing legal repercussions for her behavior. But perhaps the most significant punishment was the public's rejection of her excuses. One evening, as Mary scrolled through yet another wave of criticism, she stumbled upon a letter addressed to Elijah. It was from a young boy who described how inspired he was by Elijah's courage and dignity. For the first time, Mary paused. The letter stirred something within her, an uncomfortable but undeniable realization of the impact her actions had on others. The aftermath of the incident reverberated far beyond the royal palace. Elijah's calm yet powerful response to Mary's aggression became a global phenomenon, symbolizing grace under pressure. The footage was shared millions of times, accompanied by messages of admiration for Elijah's composure and condemnation of Mary's behavior. However, this wasn't just a fleeting viral moment. It sparked conversations that were long overdue about racism, dignity, and the unseen challenges faced by those who serve in public roles. Elijah himself was overwhelmed by the sudden attention. He had always been a private individual, dedicated to his duty without seeking recognition. Now he found himself at the center of a worldwide discussion, hailed as a hero by people he had never met. Letters poured in from all corners of the globe, many thanking him for showing strength and restraint in the face of injustice. One particular letter struck a chord with Elijah. It was from a teacher in a rural school who described how the video of the incident had sparked a meaningful discussion among her students about racism and respect. "Your actions taught my class more than any lesson I could have given," the teacher wrote. Reading that letter, Elijah realized the depth of the impact his actions had on people he would likely never meet. Despite the positivity, there were challenges. The newfound fame brought scrutiny to Elijah's personal life. Media outlets dug into his background, eager to uncover details about the man behind the viral moment. Elijah, who had always valued his privacy, struggled with this intrusion. He began receiving invitations to appear on talk shows and participate in interviews, all of which he politely declined. He wasn't interested in fame. His focus remained on his duties and the values he held dear. Meanwhile, Mary's life was unraveling in ways she had never anticipated. The video of her slapping Elijah had made her infamous overnight. Her behavior was widely condemned, and she faced severe backlash, both online and in her personal life. Her employer terminated her contract, citing a violation of company values. Friends distanced themselves from her, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Mary's life, once comfortable and predictable, had been turned upside down. At first, Mary reacted with anger and defensiveness. She blamed the media for portraying her in a negative light and dismissed the criticism as an overreaction. But as the days turned into weeks, the weight of her actions began to sink in. She couldn't ignore the messages flooding her inbox, some hateful, others urging her to reflect on her behavior. One evening, Mary sat alone in her apartment, scrolling through social media. She came across an article about Elijah, detailing his life and the challenges he had faced as a Black Royal Guard. For the first time, she saw Elijah not as a faceless figure